This is my first sketchbook. Most of these sketches are done with a permanent pen. I challenged myself to do that because of a problem I had. Back then, I developed a habit of erasing everything I drew every time I started a drawing. Of course, with permanent pen, erasing wasn't an option. Because of this, I needed to be more focused while drawing and achieve the desired shape of, for example, a head in fewer number of strokes. You can clearly see how much I was struggling in the beginning of the sketchbook and how I gradually became more confident using a pen. I think it actually might be a sketchbook in which my improvement is most visible, which is actually understandable. I went from drawing once a week or once every 2 weeks to drawing almost every day. I had to warm up to drawing portraits of my classmates. Naturally, I was pretty scared of drawing people, scared of them noticing, of laughing at my drawings and at my lack of skills. But the thing that helped me in overcoming that fear was noticing that people don't really care about me drawing them. And if my classmates did notice, they usually only said, "Oh, cool," and that was it. For the most part, I use various micron pens. I used them quite a lot before starting the sketchbook, so I was pretty comfortable with using them daily. After a while of using the classic ones, I treated myself to a micron calligraphy pen with a wide tip. It gave me an option to navigate between very bold strokes and thin lines. Next up was a gel pen. Honestly, it didn't really suit me. My drawings became very stiff. It might not look like a huge difference, but I remember I just couldn't get it to work the way I wanted it to. I'm very proud of this sketchbook. It really showed me that drawing consistently and challenging myself to draw despite being terrified of being bad really makes you improve. I'm so glad 2015 Sophie did that. Congrats, kiddo. Okay, so this sketchbook is actually my most disliked one, but I have to tell you that I usually do not hate the stuff I produce. I just objectively see that this wasn't the best period of my art journey. I didn't feel connected to it. Also, the titanium white paper wasn't really my taste and still isn't. I found it hard to fill whole pages, and the square format didn't really suit me. There was just too much space. Also, I did a lot of sketches with black gel pen. I remember working with it made me kind of uncomfortable, or rather, I didn't really like the style of drawing gel pen made me draw in. It was very round and flowy, and all of my sketches here lack proper construction, especially the bodies. They feel shoulderless. The faces are very flat and round and don't really have any structure. It's like the lines and shapes lack certain weight I like to see in my drawings. Also, I couldn't achieve the same line weight variation I did with the calligraphy pen. My favorite sketches from this sketchbook are definitely these ones though. They have proper texture and values, and they feel like they have that weight I was talking about, proper structure and depth to them. A good portion of these sketchbooks are drawings made without reference. It was about the time I really got into the concept art and illustration stuff online and followed a lot of artists on Tumblr and Instagram and ArtStation, and a lot of them seemed to be drawing perfectly without using references and talked about it a lot, which actually after a while made me have kind of an unhealthy approach to my own art and using references. I couldn't really draw without references, or rather I had a lot of trouble trying to and was never satisfied with the result. It was something that made me feel bad about my skills for a very long time, and to be completely clear on this topic, references are actually a great tool and are there to help you if you need them. And some people need them, and some people don't. And both attitudes are completely fine and normal. Just, don't beat yourself up about it if you are in one group or the other. I know I did beat up myself about it. And honestly, it was a waste of time and nerves. This sketchbook was a rough one in the beginning. It was actually the first sketchbook that I have ever bought. As you can see, I was more into creating small illustrations than sketching things around me, and every few drawings my perfectionism would start to kick in and prevent me from drawing anymore, and I would just abandon it for the next month or so. I only started to draw in it consistently after finishing the previous one you just saw. I went back to drawing with my favorite tool at the time, a micron pen. Those very thin lines seem to really suit me. This spread is one of my favorites, actually. I was a photographer at a chess tournament for kids, and I still think a lot of those drawings are really great. The best thing is that the likeness of the kids is actually pretty well captured, and I still remember some of them thanks to these drawings. I'm really fond of this spread as well, mostly because I managed to capture my favorite teacher's likeness so well. And this decorativeness, I really like it a lot. I try to get back into gel pens. As you can see here, I bought a cheap green one, and even though that roundness and lack of weight were still present in my way of drawing, I quite liked working with gel pens this time. I think it's also worth mentioning that at that moment, working my sketchbook and generally having it with me everywhere I went became quite natural. I didn't notice it back then, but now I'm just super proud of Sophie from that time. She worked really hard to become consistent with using her sketchbook, and after 7 months, she finally became really consistent and was beginning to have a lot of fun. Actually, at this point, I put this sketchbook away for a while and turned to one that wasn't that good. This sketchbook, it kind of turned out to be a disaster. I was extremely inconsistent with it, and to be honest, apart from these few pages in the beginning, it's just outright a big ugh for me. Even though I dislike it and do not consider it a proper sketchbook, I still wanted you to see it. I think it's important to not get hooked on this idea that every next sketchbook has to be better than the last one. Sometimes it just doesn't feel right, the size doesn't work in your favor, and every next drawing looks worse than the last. And honestly, it's completely okay. This sketchbook is almost exclusively a summer holiday sketchbook. I had a lot of fun while drawing in it. I took advantage of the fact that we traveled quite a lot and drew lots of strangers we have encountered in airports, hotels, and restaurants. I even sketched a bit of landscapes here and there. Even though I've been drawing from life in all of my previous sketchbooks, this time it was a bit more challenging. Most of my previous sketchbooks were filled with drawings of my classmates I did during classes. They stayed in the same positions for prolonged periods of time, and that allowed me to take my time to draw them. It was very helpful in the beginning since I didn't have to rush myself or worry about them changing their position all the time. I slowly grew more efficient and took less and less time to draw people, but still, drawing my classmates meant that I always had that extra bit of time and felt very safe. That time buffer while drawing became my comfort zone, and I knew I had to leave it during the course of this sketchbook. Of course, people waiting for flights or eating at restaurants stay pretty still most of the time, but there is a chance they're going to change their position at any moment. That uncertainty, besides giving me a rush of adrenaline, certainly made me sketch quicker. It also forced me to be more focused and less picky when it came to choosing my subjects, as well as use my imagination or memory to finish a sketch when the person I was drawing unexpectedly moved. Even though I was pretty scared at first, which is completely natural since, I was leaving my comfort zone, I warmed up to it pretty quickly, and in the end, I had a lot of fun drawing in those short intervals and learned a lot. Okay, let's look at one of my favorites. This sketchbook starts with a few portraits done with a micron pen. This page, though, is very important. And it's not the drawing, it's not that great, it's okay. It's just that this marks my discovery of fountain pens. And I love fountain pens because the lines are thin, flowy, and full of air, but the structure of the face and the weight of its construction is still very clear. Drawing with a fountain pen always makes my hands movements more dynamic and almost effortless. The metal tip just glides over the surface of the paper so freely. The process of drawing feels incredibly smooth to me. The point of that whole poetic thing is really to show you how much it can sometimes mean to have a tool that feels really good to work with. Discovering fountain pens really fueled my creativity, and I was very excited every time I pulled out my sketchbook, which naturally resulted in me drawing more and being more carefree while sketching. All of those sketches are messy and are not pretty at all, which actually makes them great. It means that I was more focused on the process and the joyful feeling of drawing rather than the finished product. After all those years of sketching, I came to a conclusion that this is one of the most important things for me, focusing on the process and taking risks and not thinking too much about bad drawings. Bad drawings will happen, and they happen all the time. And really, I'm not a fan of saying that there is no bad art. I think there is. I make bad art all the time, and out of those sketches I'm showing you are not great. Bad art is a natural part of the learning process, and secondly, a lot of times it just means you're taking a risk, experimenting and doing something for the first time. And I found that a lot of times making bad art helped me grow a lot more than doing good art that is the result of staying in my comfort zone. Sure, good sketches and great drawings make me feel proud and good about myself, and that is a necessary part of doing anything artistic. But sometimes performing badly, especially when it's a result of stepping out of your comfort zone, is just as necessary. I guess doing art is mostly balancing those two things, being both your critic and your biggest fan, or being like a good parent that helps you overcome your shortcomings by cheering you on, but also by disciplining you. This one. I love it so much. As you can see, I started with my love, a very cheap fountain pen. I was also gifted a few markers, which you can see me using here and there. This format allowed me for more freedom, basically. I wasn't as limited as in that little one, and it really shows. The lines are even more dynamic, and there's even more of that airy feeling in those portraits. The thin lines work so beautifully with a lot of empty space between them. Those full spreads still look really great to me, and I can still somehow remember how easy and fast drawing them was. Just like with that small sketchbook, I didn't care about anything. I went literally everywhere with that sketchbook, and I spent hours of classes drawing. I remember filling one page after another like mad. I think it actually helped me to shift my attention from anxiety. I was finishing high school, and on top of, the matura, I had to do a so-called diploma, which in short is just a big art project that you have no idea how to do. So drawing felt like a blissful escape from reality at that moment. In the second part of the sketchbook, I decided to work on my drawing from imagination skills. As I mentioned before, I was really bad at drawing people from my head and not from reference, but I thought, why not just try a bit harder this time and stop being so tragically scared of the outcome. And to be honest, those sketches are not great, but I'm still very fond of them. I developed a little backstory for those characters and just, played around, had fun. To be honest, I remember that at that point I didn't have to worry about sketching every day. Drawing in those sketchbooks became a part of my life, and as I mentioned before, it became a coping mechanism, a place where I could just have fun, and nobody, including myself, had to criticize my works. During that time, we had quite a big amount of history of art lectures. They were, our teacher at that time could go on and on talking about stuff we were just a bit too young to understand, so I developed a habit of spending that time drawing in my sketchbook. Every time we entered that classroom, I would just reach for my sketchbook and start drawing the minute the lecture would start. And I'm saying this because I think that this helped me to keep up the tempo, keep being consistent with sketching, even though there were days where I was tired and overwhelmed and didn't want to do anything. I think it's interesting that even though we may feel that, for example, sketching, as I said, is a part of my life and doing it is almost automatic at times, it's still a habit that you can neglect. Creating a safety net, like linking that activity to a place or time in your day, or perhaps another habit, can prove really useful in more stressful periods. At that time, I was really focused on getting better at drawing, on growing my skills, but at the same time, I was juggling a lot of other things in my life that needed a big chunk of my attention. So creating a simple habit like taking out my sketchbook in that one particular class freed me from having to think about practicing drawing every day, which naturally made me just calmer and less anxious. Let's go back to my third sketchbook for just a tiny bit, because after finishing the previous one, I felt I needed to complete this one as well. So I continued with the characters from before, but I also went back to drawing with a pencil. It was a pleasant surprise, really. I can clearly see how drawing with the fountain pen influenced me, even though I wasn't using it anymore. The flow was still there, and I kind of adopted those very geometric shapes and more graphic shading into graphite drawing. This sketchbook marks the end of high school, and honestly, it's alright. There are a few pieces that I like, but I can clearly see how rough and inconsistent I was with drawing. Apart from finishing high school, I also did my diploma project, which consumed most of my creative energy. I can very clearly see that I was tired and I pretty much forced myself to draw. I wasn't really feeling it, and that is also why I abandoned it after filling in just a few pages. I know I will come back to it sooner or later. It's still a nice sketchbook. Its time just hasn't come yet. Okay, so that's it for my high school years when it comes to sketchbooks. I actually never realized how much I drew during these 3 years. I can confidently say that I had a lot of fun while doing these. I never quite realized just how much they are like a journal to me. Thank you, Sophie, from 2015 for sticking to drawing consistently, because those sketchbooks are a real joy to look at. Thank you so much for getting till the end of this video. There is a special treat for all of you who did. I scanned 2 of my sketchbooks and uploaded them for your viewing pleasure, so feel free to download them from the links in the description. Thank you again so much for watching, and like, subscribe to join my Dudes Club, and see you in the next one. Bye!